right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling Isaac Newton. You know, the Apple guy, the gravity guru, but did you know he was a low-key crime fighter and obsessed with alchemy?
It's true. This guy was way more than just equations and telescopes.
So how did he go from, well, a regular birth to changing the world? He was born in 1642, right?
Right.
Christmas Day, no less?
Yeah, Christmas Day, 1642. But picture this, not exactly a Hallmark movie start. He was premature, his dad died before he was born, his mom kind of bounced when he was little. Rough start, right?
You're telling me. So not exactly set up for scientific superstardom?
Yeah.
How did he even get into academics?
Not a stellar student at first, actually, but then, classic schoolyard story, a bully picked on him, lit a fire under young Isaac, suddenly top of his class.
So bullies unintentionally create geniuses. Note to self. But Cambridge, right, that's where things really took off.
Cambridge it is. Started as a subsizer, though, working odd jobs to pay his way. Imagine, the guy who'd cracked the code of gravity, serving you dinner.
Talk about humble beginnings. Okay, but then the plague hit, right? Didn't that shut everything down?
1665, the bubonic plague. Cambridge closed up shop, everyone scattered. Newton heads home, and those 2 years. His golden years, he called them. That's when calculus, optics, gravity, it all started brewing.
So while the world was freaking out, he's having his own personal scientific revolution. That's wild.
Wild is right. Being away from the stuffy academics, it was like his mind just exploded with ideas. Later, he said that was his most creative period.
All right, let's break down some of these big ideas. First up, Newton the math whiz. Calculus, right? But wasn't there drama with Leibniz?
Oh yeah, the great calculus controversy. Newton figured it out years before Leibniz, but Leibniz published first, so his notation became the standard.
Even geniuses have rivals, huh? So was Newton's method just too hard to understand? Is that why it didn't catch on?
Not exactly. Leibniz's way was more like algebra, easier to use and lots of problems. Newton's was rooted in geometry, which some say reveals deeper stuff, especially for physics.
It's two paths to the same mountaintop. Both brilliant, just different styles.
Exactly. Happens all the time in science. Sometimes the less popular path has hidden gems waiting to be rediscovered.
Makes you wonder what brilliant ideas were missing just because they weren't packaged the right way.
Yeah.
Okay, on to something a little less mathy. Newton the alchemist. Seriously, the science guy was into mysticism. What's the deal with that?
That's the thing about Newton. He loved connecting things that seemed totally separate. And yeah, alchemy was a big part of his life. Tons of his writing wasn't about math or physics. It was about this stuff.
So was he trying to make gold? I mean, who wouldn't want that, right?
It was deeper than that. Alchemy for him was about understanding matter, the forces of the universe, even the spiritual side of things. He was looking for patterns, connections between everything, like a unified theory of, well, everything.
That's a long way from apples falling from trees.
Right. But this ability to jump between ideas, what some call Januszian thinking, that was his superpower.
Januszian thinking.
Like the Roman god Janus, two faces looking forward and backward. Newton could embrace logic and the mystical all at once.
I like that. Sounds like he was way ahead of his time. All right, let's move on to something a bit more concrete, his work with light. The famous prism experiment, right? Where he proved white light is actually a mix of all colors.
Right. People used to think color was somehow added to light when it hit things. He showed it's built in. The prism splits the sunlight like a rainbow, then puts it back together, white again. Color, it's not an add-on, it's fundamental.
So he's saying the world is always colorful, we just needed the right tool to see it. Which brings us to his fancy telescope.
The reflecting telescope. See, those old lens telescopes had this problem, chromatic aberration. Things got blurry because colors bent differently. He used mirrors, problem solved, sharper images, way out there in space.
The man was on a roll, solved the mysteries of light and color, then gave us a new way to see the universe. Speaking of the universe, we can't forget gravity. This is where the apple comes in, right?
The apple, yeah, might be a bit embellished over time, but people close to Newton said watching an apple fall did make him think about gravity in a new way. He already had this idea of an inverse square law in his head.
Hold on, inverse square law. I need a translator here.
Basically, a force gets weaker the farther away you are. Double the distance, the force is 4 times weaker. Newton thought, could this be why the moon stays around the Earth? Gravity's weaker way out there, but still strong enough to hold it in orbit.
So he's just relaxing, sees an apple drop, and bam, universal gravitation. Just like that.
Not that fast. He'd been working on it for years, but that apple was like a missing puzzle piece. The same force, pulling the apple down, also keeping the moon dancing around the Earth and the planets around the sun. Mind blown.
But I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It wasn't just about the apple, it was about connecting everyday things to the whole universe.
And that led him to his masterpiece, the book Principia Mathematica, published in 1687.
That's the one that laid the foundation for, like, all of physics, right? Laws of motion, how gravity rules the universe, all that.
You got it. Changed everything. Put Newton on the map as one of the biggest names in science, period.
No kidding. It's like he handed us the instruction manual for the universe. But we've only scratched the surface here. His religious side, his time at the Royal Mint, and what his work meant for the world beyond science. So much more to uncover.
Tons more. And each part of his life shows just how brilliant and complex this guy was.
You know, it's amazing how Principia, this hardcore science book, had a huge impact on culture, too.
Like people were reading it for fun.
Not exactly. It was more about the ideas. See, Principia showed the universe works by rules, predictable laws. Humans could figure those laws out, even use them. This was huge for the Enlightenment, that time when reason and logic were all the rage.
So like a ripple effect. Newton's work made people think, hey, if the universe has rules, maybe everything does. Exactly. It changed how people saw the world. From philosophy to politics, even economics, Newton helped shape the modern world, not just with his discoveries, but with how he thought.
Okay, but let's get back to Newton himself. We talked about all the science stuff, but the guy was in Parliament too, right? That seems a bit random.
Yeah, a little out of place. He was a member of Parliament for a bit, but not really a big-time politician. Story goes, he only spoke up once to complain about a draft.
More focused on the laws of physics than the laws of the land.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. But then there's the Royal Mint thing. That's a serious career shift.
For real. In 1696, he's appointed warden, later master of the Royal Mint. Not just some honorary title either. He took it seriously.
So what was he designing coins?
He was in charge of all the money, making sure the coins were good quality, stopping counterfeiters. He even went undercover, like a detective, busting those fake money rings.
Wait, are you serious? Isaac Newton, undercover cop? That's too good.
No joke. The guy was dedicated. He overhauled the whole English money system, stabilized the economy. Counterfeiters didn't stand a chance.
This guy really could do it all, huh? But didn't he also have some, shall we say, unique religious views?
Yeah, this is where things get interesting. He was a devout Christian, no doubt, but he didn't buy the whole Trinity thing, Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Back then, that was a big no-no.
So he was risking a lot by believing differently.
Totally. Heresy was a dangerous accusation back then. He kept it mostly quiet, but you can see it in his writings. He wasn't afraid to question even the most sacred beliefs. That's independent thinking right there.
The guy never stopped questioning, did he? Science, religion, even how to run a mint. Always digging deeper.
And that brings us back to alchemy. It might seem out there, but remember, for Newton, it was about more than just magic potions and turning lead into gold.
You said earlier he was after a unified theory of everything. What did you mean by that?
For Newton, alchemy was about understanding the very essence of stuff, the forces that hold the universe together. He thought there was a hidden order, a divine plan behind everything.
So he was looking for the blueprint of creation, like how did God make all this?
Exactly. And he believed through experiments, observations, really thinking deeply, we could crack the code, see the connections between everything, the physical and the spiritual.
It's like he was trying to bridge science and religion, finding a way that they could both be true.
Right. A more holistic view of the world where science and spirituality weren't enemies. That's a pretty modern idea, actually.
Okay, so we've got this brilliant scientist, philosopher, theologian, reformer, crime fighter, and mystic all rolled into one. It's almost too much to process. But let's try to sum it up. How did Isaac Newton change the world? Just how big was his impact?
That's the big question, right? And it's complicated. He didn't just discover stuff. He changed how we understand the universe and our place in it.
So where do we even start?
Well, got to start with gravity. That one concept, universal gravitation, explained how planets move, stars, everything. The same force pulling that apple down, that's what's holding the whole universe together.
So he connected heaven and earth, literally. And he showed that it all works by rules. Rules we can understand, even use.
Exactly. Huge implications there. His work in physics led to classical mechanics, which impacts everything from engineering to architecture. Then there's the reflecting telescope, opening up the universe for us to explore.
And calculus, that's got to be up there.
Oh, definitely. Calculus is like the language of change and motion. It describes how things move, grow, interact. We use it to understand planets, fluids, even tiny particles. Physics, engineering, economics, you name it, it's everywhere.
Okay, so his scientific work alone, that's game-changing. But we talked about his influence beyond science too, right?
Huge cultural impact. The Enlightenment, that whole shift toward reason and logic, Newton was a big part of that. He inspired people to question old ways of thinking, look for evidence, figure things out for themselves.
So not just changing what we knew, but how we thought about knowing things.
Exactly. Challenging assumptions, demanding proof. That's the foundation of modern science and critical thinking in general.
And his religious views, even though they were controversial, they show that independent thinking again.
Right. He wasn't afraid to challenge authority, even in religion. He shows us that it's okay to question, to think for yourself, even if it means going against the grain.
Then there's the Royal Mint, reforming the currency, taking down counterfeiters. He was a man of action, too.
Totally. It shows his practical side, his dedication to public service. The guy was brilliant, but also grounded, committed to making things better.
All right, I'm convinced. Isaac Newton, a total game changer. We could talk about him for days. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to alchemy. Why was he so drawn to it? What was he hoping to find in all those experiments?
That's a great question, and one that has intrigued people for centuries. I think for Newton, alchemy was a very personal journey, and it was all about trying to understand the universe at its deepest level. Like, how was it created? What are the forces at play?
So it was more about the big picture, the meaning of it all, not just like whipping up magic potions in his basement.
Right, exactly. For him, alchemy was like a spiritual quest, almost as much as a scientific one. He was trying to find the connections between the material world, the stuff we can see and touch, and the spiritual realm, the things we can't.
Hmm.
Remember, back then, science and religion weren't seen as separate things like they are today.
Yeah, people still believed in magic and the supernatural, and the lines between science and, well, mysticism were kind of blurry.
Exactly. And alchemy, for Newton, it was a way to try and make sense of both of those worlds. Like maybe there was a single principle, some hidden rule that connected everything.
So he thought God had a plan, like a blueprint for the universe, and that maybe alchemy could help him understand that plan.
You got it. That was the idea. He thought maybe if we observed carefully, experimented, really thought about it, we could unlock the secrets of creation. Like finding the philosopher's stone, the key to understanding matter and energy.
It's amazing to think about, the same guy who figured out calculus and gravity, he was also fascinated by alchemy. It's like his curiosity had no limits.
Definitely. And even though we might think of alchemy as, well, not real science today, for Newton, it was a legitimate way to explore the world. He was asking big questions about matter, about how nature works, about how everything is connected.
It seems like he was always pushing the boundaries, trying new things, searching for answers to the biggest questions about the universe. But how do we make sense of all this? The Newton who revolutionized science, and the Newton who spent years dabbling in alchemy.
Yeah.
Were these two sides of him at odds with each other, or did they somehow work together?
That's the question, isn't it? And people have been debating that for centuries. Some people think his alchemy stuff was a waste of time, like he got distracted from real science. But others say those two interests, science and alchemy, were actually connected. Maybe his alchemy work even influenced his scientific thinking in ways we don't fully understand.
So instead of two separate Newtons, maybe it was all just one big, brilliant mind exploring everything it could.
Right. His alchemy research might not have led to any big scientific discoveries, but it shows us how his mind worked. Always searching, always making connections, always trying to figure out how things really worked.
Sounds like he was way ahead of his time, thinking about stuff that we're only just starting to understand now.
Yeah.
But here's a question for you. If Newton was alive today, what scientific problem do you think he'd be working on?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. Given everything he was interested in and how much he loved learning, who knows? But I bet he'd be tackling some of the biggest mysteries we're facing today, the stuff that's still stumping even the smartest scientists.
Okay, give me some examples. What kind of mysteries are we talking about?
Well, there's dark matter and dark energy. They make up most of the universe, but we have no idea what they are. I think Newton, with his fascination with gravity and the cosmos, he'd be all over that.
Yeah, I can see him designing experiments, analyzing data from telescopes, coming up with new theories, trying to crack the code as dark matter.
Totally. Or maybe he'd be diving into quantum mechanics. The weird world of subatomic particles, where the normal rules don't apply. He was great at connecting different ideas, so maybe he'd be trying to figure out how quantum mechanics fits with general relativity, like a grand unified theory of everything.
Now that would be something, to see what Newton could do with the tools and knowledge we have today. It's mind-blowing to think about.
It really is. But one thing's for sure, Isaac Newton's legacy of scientific thinking, his curiosity, his belief in the power of reason that's still inspiring people today. He showed us what the human mind is capable of, and that's a challenge for all of us, to keep pushing the boundaries of what we know.
Absolutely. He reminds us that learning never ends. There's always more to discover, more questions to ask.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into the life and work of Isaac Newton.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through Newton's world. We hope you learned some cool stuff and maybe even got inspired to do some exploring of your own. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing, and who knows, maybe you'll be the next Isaac Newton.